The perfect New York cheesecake is rich, creamy, and tangy. It pretty much has a little bit of everything. And because I've been making this at home ever since I was a kid, I've technically been perfecting this recipe my entire life. Most people, when they make a cheesecake, go with your classic graham cracker crust. But I start my cheesecake with one simple change that makes it that much better. And that is browning the butter that's gonna go into my graham cracker crust. Don't do this extra step if you don't want to or you don't have the time. But I think that waking up that butter and giving it that nuttiness that you get with brown butter can completely transform the final product of your cheesecake. Anytime I make brown butter, I know that once it starts getting really foamy and bubbly like this, it is very close to being finished. Once those golden brown bits start to appear, immediately remove your pan from the heat and pour it off right away into a bowl. That is perfect brown butter. The easiest way to blend up your graham crackers is going to be to use a food processor, just like this one. This part is easy, but also very important, and you shouldn't be following exactly what the recipe says. Follow your kitchen instincts, and I'll explain how to do that right now. Graham crackers into our food processor, and before we add anything else, we'll pulse them up a few times. Pulse them up until no large pieces remain. To finish it off, I'll add a sprinkle of salt, a touch of sugar, then I'll close it up once more, and as I continue to pulse, I'm going to slowly add in our brown butter. Before I've added all the brown butter, we want just enough butter in our graham cracker crust that it holds together, but not so much that it becomes oily and soggy. And I will admit, I have ruined cheesecakes before that way, so you need to be careful here. Based on this, it looks like you need to add just a bit more butter. Once it reaches a consistency that almost feels and sounds exactly like wet sand and just barely holds shape when you squeeze it together like this, you've got yourself the perfect graham cracker crust. The pan that you use to make a cheesecake is a special pan. It's called a springform pan. If you look here on the front, there's a clip, and when you undo that clip, the sides come right off. That way you can bake your cheesecake here, and then you can take the side off and really easily cut into it at the end. So before you add anything into this pan, make sure it's very well locked in and secured. And once you're confident that it's secure, go ahead and pour in that graham cracker crust. Now you need to form it into the bottom of the pan. Remember, the crust on a cheesecake doesn't really come much up the sides. So instead, evenly pat it down across the bottom of the whole pan, and then just barely let it start to crawl up the sides. Since I'm a cheesecake perfectionist, I also like to use something to try to press it down and make it really perfect and flat and even in the center. But every time I made this as a kid, I always just used my fingers and nobody ever seemed to complain. Chances are, if you're good at making sandcastles at the beach, you'll be really good at pressing out a graham cracker crust. To set the crust, we'll bake this for just a couple minutes while we make our cheesecake filling. Cheesecake, of course, is made up of mostly cheese, specifically lots and lots of cream cheese. And as a first step, we just want to break that cream cheese up just enough that it's pretty evenly mixed. This next step is something really cool. Into a bowl, I'm going to add some sugar, and then into that sugar, I'll add the zest of one whole lemon. Before we add the sugar to our cream cheese, what I'll do is I'll go in with my fingers and kind of grind and mix it all up, almost pressing that lemon zest and sugar together. Not only will this make one of the best smells you may have ever experienced in your kitchen, but it'll basically pull out all of that really nice lemon oil from the lemon zest, and the flavor will really come through in your cheesecake. Similar to making that graham cracker crust, you'll know that this is done when it looks and feels a little bit like wet sand. Add all of your lemon sugar to your mix. Oh no. Then mix again. Once that's mixed up, I'll add in the juice from 1/2 of a lemon, some sour cream, which works really well in a cheesecake, some vanilla bean paste, which will get us that nice vanilla bean flavor, but also that speckled vanilla bean look in our cheesecake, and then just the tiniest sprinkle of salt. And again, mix it up. You'll notice I'm mixing on low because we don't want to add in too much air to this cheesecake, because remember, a cheesecake is pretty dense. Unless you're making a Japanese souffle cheesecake, you don't want it light and fluffy. The final step for our cheesecake filling is to crack in 4 eggs, one at a time until each one is fully mixed in. Wow, that is a strong yolk. All right, there we go. That looks really cool. Here's number 2, number 3, and number 4. And one pro tip is to use room temperature eggs, because that'll actually help to make a better filling. To finish off my filling, I like to give it one last good scrape all around the bowl to make sure everything's actually evenly mixed. And that's our filling. Our graham cracker crust should also be baked off just enough now that it's been properly set. So let this cool off to the side for just a few minutes, at which point you can go ahead and pour in that filling. I'll tell you a little secret. I love when I see a few little clumps in there when I pour it, because one of my favorite parts about eating a cheesecake is when you get those little blips of unmixed cream cheese. It gives this extra little creamy burst, kind of a little surprise, almost like when you're swimming in the ocean and you hit one of those warm spots. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. The cheesecake filling should be just the right consistency where you really don't need to do much to spread it out. All you really need to do is carefully place it on a sheet tray. This is just a little bit easier to place in and out of the oven compared to this. And as a final step, you can give it a few gentle taps just to try to get some of those bubbles out of the top. And now we can bake it low and slow. While our cheesecake is baking happily in the oven, I'm gonna make an easy homemade berry sauce. I never use a recipe for this because all you have to remember is berries, a little bit of sugar, and some water. Then you bring that over some heat and just mix those up and let them go over medium or medium high. Optionally, add a touch of lemon zest, which will really brighten it up and helps to tie in nicely with the lemon zest that we put in our cheesecake filling, and a nice generous squeeze of lemon juice. Ooh. I dropped a seed in there. See if you can spot it. Once this begins to bubble around the edges, turn your heat down to about medium, then just let it cook until some of those blueberries start to open up. To finish it off, I'll add a cornstarch slurry, which I made with just a touch of cornstarch and hot water. That will thicken up our berry sauce. And if you want to cheat a little bit, you can add in a little bit of pre-made blueberry jam. What that'll do is almost give you a bit of that artificial gooiness that's hard to replicate on your own at home. And in just a few more seconds, this should finish up all on its own. That cornstarch takes a minute to activate, but if you look at the bottom of the pan, you can already see that it's moving slower and starting to thicken up into the consistency that we're looking for. Pour this off into a bowl. This will let it thicken up just a touch more. So good. Once your cheesecake has been baking for close to an hour and a half, turn off your oven and crack it slightly open. This will allow your cheesecake to cook the rest of the way through very slowly without cracking. After that, I'll place it into the fridge to set, and our cheesecake is finally done. I always do this part very carefully and slowly. Open up your springform pan, cross your fingers that nothing tears, make sure nothing is connected, and slowly lift up. Over here, I have a pot of boiling water, which I'm gonna pour off into this container so that I can heat up my knife as I cut my cheesecake. All we need now is a plate and our homemade blueberry sauce, and then I'll dip my knife into some boiling water, just let that sit for a few moments to let it heat up, and then working quickly, I'll dry off my knife and go in for the first cut. Before we do a second cut, same thing with the knife. Clean it off in the hot water and once again, let it heat up. Quick wipe and another slice. Let's see how we did. How's that? Yeah, I'd eat that. Let's finish this thing off. Now, normally I wouldn't plate this up so fancy, but I'm gonna do it today, just for you all, over the top with a nice, generous heap of this blueberry sauce that we made. Not too much, not too little. Then just toss a couple raspberries wherever you want. Same thing with a couple blackberries. And finally, just a couple blueberries. To me, that's about as beautiful as any dessert can get. This right here, this makes me very happy. And just by looking at it, I know I'm gonna get all those different notes of balance that I'm going for. It's gonna be tangy, it's gonna be creamy, it's gonna be crumbly on the bottom. I'll get a nice tart punch from that berry sauce on the sides. It'll have a little bit of everything. All that's left now is to take a nice big bite. The lemon is really nice.